Hi, my name is Tim, and this is Session 7, Video 3 of Journeying the Wilderness. What we're going to be talking about is the habit of reflection. Now, if you remember, very early on, actually in the very first session, we talked about spiritual markers. So one of the places that we looked at was Joshua chapter 4, verses 20 through 24. But one of the other ones that we're going to look at here that you can look at in your plan group is Genesis 9:12 through 17. It talks about Noah and what happens after the flood, the covenant that God sets between him and mankind is the rainbow, the bow of God, a symbol of war, the weapon of God resting up, saying that he will never again destroy mankind by water. So one of the reasons why we're going to talk about that, these spiritual markers, is because if you have a relationship with a person, hopefully one of the things that you do is you have these memories that you can tell other people about. Or not just tell other people about, that you even just have for yourself in your relationship with that other person. Because hopefully as you continue in a relationship with someone, you grow in your intimacy with them based off of what you have done with them in the past. That you adjust the way that you interact with someone based off of your past experiences. That you take into account the things that your partner has said, you take into account the things that you've done with that person, and then you take that information with you as you go on into the future. So the habit of reflection, one of the things that we're asking you to do in this particular session is to start a journal. I know for some of you that might not be such a big deal, but for some of you it's going to be really hard. But keeping a journal is something that is essential, I think, to just do to help you to grow in your relationship with the Lord. But not just with the Lord. You know, if you think about the people that are some of the top CEOs in the country, some of the most productive and successful people, one of the things that they have in common is that they journal. They take time to reflect. They take time in their day, in their week, in their month, in their year to evaluate the things that they have done. And by evaluating what you've done, you can observe patterns, you can observe failures, you can observe things that are going well so that you can continue doing those things well. You can identify areas of need, to things that you need to improve in. And you can only do that if you evaluate. And one of the easiest ways to evaluate is by keeping a journal. So one of the things that we're asking you to do for this activity is to start a journal. To make a list of all the things you can thank God for every day for 1 week. To record one thing that you've experienced with God in your relationship every day for 1 week. And the things that you might record about your relationship with God might be something that God has revealed to you from His Word. It might be a conversation that you've had with somebody else that helped you to understand God in a new way. Or it might be some other kind of experience. The point is you want to be aware and intentional of developing your relationship with God. Because I can guarantee you that in your relationship with a person that you really like, when you first start that relationship with each other, you can be super intentional about the things that you do to grow in your intimacy and your relationship with that person. But as time goes on, sometimes it's difficult for us to do that because we just don't take the time to really think. We just take people for granted in the same way that we might take our relationship with God for granted. So we don't know what is actually going on in our relationship. We can't really evaluate the health of our relationship because we're just keeping things status quo. We're just getting comfortable in where we are. And a lot of the times that might mean that we need to have a dose of reality hit us in the face so that we can see, oh, this is where I am and this is where that other person is. And we're not in the same place. We've gone off in two different directions. Only by reflecting, evaluating your relationship can you see where you guys are, and so that you can work on the things that you need to work on to continue to grow in your intimacy with one another. So, where does this stuff come from? Where is this coming from? I'll tell you. Back in 2009, that was a really rough period of time in my life. It was a rough spot in my life, and the stuff that we're talking about in you journaling, this is where this stuff is coming from. What I decided to do towards the end of 2009, as I started in 2010, was I started to want to just figure out, like, okay, so there are a lot of things in my life right now that are not going well, and one of those things is my relationship with the Lord. What are the things that are a part of my life in the past that help me to experience growth in my relationship with God, to help me to experience His power and presence and to develop in my intimacy with Him? What are the things that were characteristic of my life at that time that are not characteristic of my life now? And one of the things that I recognized in 2009, coming out of a deployment, getting hit up with PTSD and clinical depression, and them trying to kick me out of the Army and all this other stuff, was I just wasn't a thankful person. I didn't have much to be thankful for, and I just had a really bad attitude. This money that I was supposed to be getting from the Army, I wasn't receiving for whatever reason, because they were bad with pay and all that kind of stuff. And there were a few other things that were happening in my life at that time too that just made me very ungrateful. So one of the things that I could recognize from my life in the past was, I used to be a part of this prayer group. I used to be a part of a few prayer groups. And one of the things that I could always appreciate when I was a part of those groups was how we would intercede for the needs of other people. And whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, this is what I thought when I was, I don't know, like 19 or 20, was, man, those people's lives suck. As I was praying for them, because of all the different things that I would hear about the needs of the people in my church, the needs of the people in these small group fellowships, and I would try to intercede for them. But one of the things that I could recognize was I always had something to be thankful for, because I was always hearing about the things that other people were going through, these difficult situations. And it helped me to be more aware of all the things that God had given to me, to be more grateful and aware of the things that were going well in my life instead of focusing on all the negative things that were going on in my life. So one of the things that I decided to do was to create a list of all the things that I could thank God for, because I just recognized that I was so consumed with the things that were going wrong in my life that I couldn't recognize all the good that God was doing, all the things that God had been showing me mercy in, all the things that God had been sparing me from, because I was so focused in on what I didn't have. So that's what we're asking you to do in this journal, is to make a list of all the things that you can thank God for every day for a week. See how that changes your attitude. See how that changes your perspective on life. And as I started to do that, what I decided to do was I just thank God for all the things that I could. There's 26 things that I would do, because I would just do A through Z. Right? The things I could thank God for. And I just list those things out. From the smallest mundane things to awesome big things. Because really, there's so many small things that we take for granted. That I had gasoline in my car. That I had the money to pay for that fuel. That I had food in my stomach. That I had a place to sleep. All these things that I take for granted. And as I started to take a list of all those things in my day and to become more aware of all the things that God has blessed me with, it helped me to change my attitude so that I wouldn't feel like life sucked, because I recognized all the things that God had given to me. The other thing was, I wanted to make sure that I was taking inventory of the things that God was saying to me, and that I was responding to those things. Because when you have a relationship with someone, hopefully you guys communicate. And if you communicate with each other, then there's at least some sense of you being connected. Because one of the things that I really feared was that God was no longer speaking to me. And if God was no longer speaking to me and no longer correcting me, then that has some pretty serious implications for my relationship with Christ. That if God is no longer disciplining me, that if God is no longer speaking to me, and I'm no longer listening and no longer hearing, then I might not have a relationship with Him anymore. So one of the things that I wanted to make sure that I did was I wanted to take inventory of all the things that God was saying to me. And then also, I wanted to make sure that I was responding to it. That I was actually noticing what He was saying to me, that I recognized what He said, and then I responded to it, that I interacted with what God was saying to me. So what I decided to do was I decided to go ahead and keep a list of the things that I thought that God was revealing to me. And I did that through the different devotional readings that I might have. Like I had a Bible reading plan, so I would go through the scriptures. I had these devotionals I was going through, and as I read through all these things, I would write down little snippets from each one, and then I would look at the sum total of all that stuff. And then not just that, some of the conversations that I would have with people throughout the day, the circumstances in my life, and then based off of all those kinds of things, what I started noticing as I started to keep a record of all this stuff was a lot of the stuff in one devotional to another devotional, even one scripture reading to the next, had a lot of similarities. That God was trying to communicate one consistent message to me about how He wanted me to interact with Him, of how I could grow in my intimacy with Him. But I wouldn't have known any of that stuff had I not kept record of it, if I had not kept track of it, so that I could take a step back to gain perspective. You know, there's a mentor that I have. One of the things that he always tells me whenever I start to list all the issues or problems that I have is there's this door that he has in his office. He'll make me step up to the door, and he asks me, "What do you see?" And I say, "Oh, I see the door." So then he tells me, "Well, step down and step back. Now what do you see?" And it's only by stepping down and stepping back away from the issues that we can gain perspective. That takes patience and it takes time. And journaling helps us to do that. Over the course of a week, over the course of your day, you step back, you step down and back, away from the issues at hand, so you can gain perspective on what's happening in your life. And that helps you to evaluate. And when it helps you to evaluate, it helps you to be able to make better decisions. Ones that are not necessarily so emotionally driven and charged. Things that are going to be based off of fact, off of observations, off of reality. It doesn't mean that you ignore your emotions and your feelings. Those still play a part into your decision-making process. But now you're a little bit further away, so it doesn't force you or impel you to do things that are rash because you're overcome with emotion. So journaling is an important thing to do. One of the other things from here, I think we talked about it before, is just that it helps us when you journal and you have an account of all the things that God is saying to you and the way that you interact with Him, and maybe there are things that go well, maybe things that you're still struggling with. It helps you to be able to have a record of your relationship with God. It helps you to remember the things that have happened, to remember the things that, not just the rough times, but some of the good things that have happened, to give you hope for the future. Remember, one of the reasons why we have spiritual markers and the reason why we tell them is so that we can encourage people to have confidence in God, because of the way that He's acted in the past, so that they can trust Him in the present to walk confidently with God into the future. That's why we have the Bible, because the Bible is a record, a journal of the spiritual experiences, the relationships that people have had with God. And by reading these accounts, these narratives, we can gain experience and encouragement from the things that God has done in the past with other people that help us to trust Him in the present so that we can walk confidently with Him into the future. That's why you write this stuff down, because hopefully within your life you're building a habit of telling other people the ways in which God has worked in your life, to encourage them to continue, to encourage them to persevere, to encourage them to fight the good fight, to run the race of endurance, because it's hard. And as you do that, you have the opportunity to encourage people within the family of God. But one of the other things that you have the opportunity to do is to make a bridge to connect with someone that is lost and lead them to the person of Jesus Christ. That's one of the easiest ways that we can do evangelism, is by first listening. By listening to the stories that other people have to say, to the experiences that other people have, connecting with them with our shared experience, and then building a bridge from where they are and where we were to the gospel. How do you do that? Well, the way that you might do that is by practicing and by writing these spiritual experiences down, tailoring them. I don't know if we've done this yet in this actual study, but if we haven't, I'll just mention it now. There's this thing called a 100-word testimony, where you can try to share your testimony in 3 minutes or less, in 100 words or less. The way that you do that is you tell people a little bit about who you were, what God did, and then how God changed your life. And that's the way that you can share the gospel with others. That's a bridge that you can create with the lost to give them hope for the future, to give them a glimpse of what their life might look like should they do the same thing that you have done, which is to trust God and to walk with Him into the future. Or it could be a cautionary tale, where you talk about who you were, what God said, what you didn't do, and the consequences of that. And then also maybe the redemption process in that, of how God is continuing to work or has worked in your life to redeem your disobedience, to discipline you, to bring you back to Him. So the spiritual journal, hopefully this is something that you've already been doing, but if you haven't, start it now. And I just challenge you to do it for a week. But if you can, make this a bigger part of your life, to practice, to be ready to share, to be ready to give a reason for the hope that you have, to be ready to encourage those that are a part of the family of God. And the only way that you can do that is by taking the time to practice, to reflect, to journal.